Hello, I would like to welcome you to the first video in what I hope will be the start of a long series of videos that I would like to call Games That I Think Are Cool and You Should Play. Name pending. For this series of videos, I'm going to talk about my experience playing some of the mini games that I've played in my life and tell you why you should play them yourself. Something to keep in mind, this won't exactly be a review of a game, more like an overview of my experience playing a game and my perspective on it, so I won't be going into details about everything for whatever game I'm talking about. I'm mainly going to be explaining what the game is about and how it works, talk about the highlights and negatives that stood out to me, and mention some things that you might find interesting. Which, now that I say that out loud, that's kind of what a review is. If that intro didn't clue you in, for today's video, I'm going to be talking about Dead by Daylight. Given that we're in that spooky time of year, I thought there was no better game to start off with. For those who don't know, Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical horror game made by Behavior Interactive, where you play as either a group of survivors trying to escape a murderous killer, or a murderous killer trying to hunt down and slaughter all of the survivors. Now I know some of you may not quite know what an asymmetrical game is, so allow me to fill you in very quickly. In an asymmetrical game, the players of said game must complete opposing goals in order to achieve victory. This isn't as simple as red team must beat blue team and vice versa. The goals of each team most of the time compete directly against the goals that the other team or teams are trying to achieve. For example, in Among Us, the crewmates' goals are to finish all tasks and survive, while the imposter's goal is to sabotage and kill all of them. In the Friday the 13th game, the campers must survive and escape Jason to win, while Jason must hunt them and kill them to win. Which brings me neatly back to the topic of today's video. Dead by Daylight is probably one of the most popular asymmetrical games out right now, and has a bit of a monopoly on the asymmetrical genre. That's not to say that there aren't other good games in the genre, but games like the Friday the 13th and the Evil Dead have no doubt taken a few pointers from it themselves. Now, because of how this game works, I'm going to have to take some time to explain the mechanics of the survivors and killers. Starting off with the survivors, as I mentioned before, the survivor's main goal is to avoid the killer and escape the match alive. Each match begins with 4 survivors and 1 killer, which you can pick before starting each match. In each match, there are 8 generators placed around the map. As a survivor, you have to repair 5 of these generators in order to power up the exit gates, which you have to finally open to escape. That may sound simple, but you also have to pass skill checks that randomly pop up while you repair a generator, that if you fail, you lose progression on the repairing generator and it notifies the killer of your location. And of course, there is the killer who relentlessly hunts you down while you do all this. Now, it is inevitable that the killer will find you at some point during the match, and he will almost always be faster than you, so simply running away won't work. To help you avoid the killer, the maps have various aspects scattered around them, such as pallets, which you can drop down to either stun or block off the killer, lockers, which allow you to hide from the killer, and vault points, which you can hop over quickly, but the killer takes much more time to do so. These running, dodging, and hiding cycles are often called loops, and how cleverly you use the environment during these loops can mean the difference between you escaping or becoming a rotting sack of meat hanging from a hook. When the killer's knife does eventually find its way into your back, you'll first go into the injured state, which causes you to start bleeding, and along with the scratches you leave on the ground and walls as you run, allows the killer to track you easier. Get hit again while injured and you'll go into the dying state. In this state, the killer can pick you up and place you on a hook. If the killer downs and hooks you 3 times, you'll die and be permanently removed from the match. Now for the fun side, the killers. As a killer, you must sacrifice and or brutally murder all of the survivors as mentioned previously. You do this by attacking, downing, and hooking the survivors. Now, unlike the survivors, as a killer, the environment will work against you more than it will work for you. Many times in a chase, the killer will be more reactive to the survivors' movements than they will be to the killers. Especially since the killers have their own chase music and heartbeat called a tear radius that gets louder as you get closer to a survivor, essentially notifying them of your presence. The moment they know you're there, they will try to dip and dodge you for as long as they can, and you have to be smart enough to be able to predict their next move and get that decisive strike. However, what makes these killers unique, and more fun in my opinion, is that each one has their own unique ability. These abilities, just like the survivors, are broad and vast. Killers like the Trapper can lay down traps that can stun survivors, opening them up for a free hit. The Nurse can teleport around the map and through obstacles to catch survivors. The Hillbilly can charge at you with a chainsaw and down you in one hit. The Wraith can turn invisible, etc, etc. Now, some of these abilities may sound overpowered, but normally there's some kind of drawback that keeps them balanced. The Hillbilly, for example, can't make tight turns when he's charging at you. The nurse will get stunned for a period after teleporting. The wraith can attack while invisible. You get the point. Now, because of how some of these abilities function, some killers are harder to use than others. Literally. The game tells you the difficulty rating of the killer and how easy it is to efficiently use their abilities in a match. There are simple ones like the Wraith, turn invisible, find survivor, become visible, hit them, repeat. Then there are very hard killers like the Blight, whose ability involves chaining rushing attacks together by pinballing yourself off of objects to eventually run down and hopefully hit a survivor. On top of abilities, both killers and survivors have perks and add-ons that they can equip that change how the game plays. Perks and add-ons for killers can help them slow down the game by blocking off generators for a certain amount of time. They can help you hunt down the survivors by revealing the locations if they're within a certain distance of you, or even augment their abilities by lowering their recovery time or making their effects faster or last longer. Survivors have items instead of powers. These items can do things ranging from increasing generator repair speed, sabotaging hooks making them unusable, to even blinding and stunning the killer. These items will be lost if you die during the match though. While perks can do things like making them harder to track, increase healing speed, and reveal the killer's location. All of these perks, add-ons, and items can be acquired through the Blood Web, which is essentially the game's character leveling system. While there are neutral perks that are available to all survivors or killers, each character has their own specific perks, and if you level up a character enough, their specific perks become teachable perks which allow other survivors or killers to learn and use them. Combine the survivor's use of the environment, the killer's abilities, and all the perks, add-ons, and items, and you have a very interesting game of cat and mouse. Alright, that's how the game works in a nutshell. It might have been a lot to take in, and trust me, I'm sure there's a few things that I probably forgot to mention, but you pick it up pretty fast once you start playing, and plus the game has a tutorial that takes you through the basics. There are a lot of nuances though that if I took the time to explain, we'd be here all day, and this is a review, not a guide. Now, if you couldn't tell, I enjoy playing as the killers a bit more than I do the survivors. A lot more actually. This is mainly because all the survivors basically play the same. Sure, with perks and items, you can increase your ability to survive or how fast you escape, but what you do and how you do it each match is essentially the same. You spawn in, find a generator, repair it, hide or run from the killer, escape, or die. This to me is kind of boring as it can get old really quickly, and I have a short attention span. Now, you could make a similar argument for the killers as they follow a pretty monotonous path as well. Spawn in, find survivor, down them, hook them, do this 3 more times for each survivor. However, the killer's abilities make this monotonous pace a bit more interesting as their powers directly impact how you go about killing the survivors. For example, there are more stealthy killers like Ghostface whose ability allows you to sneak around and hide your presence from survivors, stalking them until you can jump out and down them in one hit. His gameplay is far more slower and methodical. You wouldn't take the same approach to killing survivors if you played as someone like the Oni, who can enter rage mode and charge at survivors to smash them with a giant club. Their abilities along with their perks add variety to what would just be the same game each match. Also, given that survivors play as a team and the killer is solo, it is much more enjoyable to play with a group of friends when playing as a survivor rather than playing alone, especially since you'll be able to communicate with your teammates and help each other out. Though, while I may find more enjoyment from playing the killers, I do think it's important to play both survivors and killers since both play differently and have their own perks. Knowing and understanding how each side plays and the perks that they have that could aid them, I think is important if you want to be more successful at the game. Now, despite what I said about playing both sides, you may find it a little difficult to do so with all the characters, given that you only start out with 4 killers and 4 survivors. This game currently has 33 survivors and 29 killers that you can buy. That's a pretty big roster to choose from, and normally there wouldn't be any problems with this. But unfortunately, all of them are expensive. You have 2 main ways of buying things in this game. The in-game currency, called iridescent shards, you get about 200 to 300 of them every time you level up, and then you have the premium currency called auric cells, which can only be acquired by using real money. One character, killer or survivor, can be bought for 9,000 shards or 300 auric cells. Again, this is a pretty common system, most live service multiplayer games use this. But because of how slow the progression is in this game, it takes forever just to get any character using shards. And that's not even counting the licensed characters. Yeah, if you know anything about horror, you may have recognized a few familiar faces in the gameplay that I've been showing. There are plenty of licensed characters from your favorite horror series like Ghostface, Michael Myers, Pinhead, Nemesis, Ash Williams, Detective Tapp, Laurie Strode, and more. And some of these characters are great to play as, assuming you have the orc cells to buy them, because you can only get licensed characters using orc cells. And don't even think about getting cosmetics with shards, because the cheapest cosmetic is about 13,000 shards. Keep in mind, you only get about 200 to 300 shards every time you level up. I honestly hate when games almost make you feel like you have to use real money just to get anything, because the progression to get the in-game currency is so slow, you have to put hours into it just to get 2 characters. A lot of Ubisoft games like For Honor and Rainbow Six Siege are guilty of this. I would give it more slack if it was free to play, but this game is like $20. That may not sound like much, but take that $20 and add how much you'll be spending and or how many hours you'll have to put into this game just to get the full experience, and it starts getting a little expensive for me. Now, while I may have said earlier that you'll learn pretty quickly once you start playing, that's not to say that there isn't a learning curve. Your first couple of matches as either a killer or survivor are going to be a little rough. And while that's fine, every game takes a little time to fully figure out, and trust me, there's plenty to learn in this game. That's not exactly going to stop other players who have been playing this game since release and have hundreds of hours in it from absolutely steamrolling you. As with any competitive multiplayer game, there's of course going to be a skill gap between players, and those gaps can be like canyons at times. While you might not have the time or money to put into buying and playing all the characters, that doesn't mean other people don't. You might play against a killer who keeps you from ever even finishing a generator, while some survivor teams may run circles around you while they blitz through the generators in minutes. You will also play against the try-hardy people who make it their sole objective to annoy you throughout the entire match. Survivor players are notorious for this. They will lead you into never-ending chases, attempt to hit you with every single pallet they can, and teabag you when they do. They will get in your way every time you try to hit someone, blind and stun you when you try to pick someone up. The list goes on. This kind of reveals another problem. Some characters have very useful and powerful perks, but as you know, their perks don't become available to other characters until you level them up to a certain point. Which means, to get some of the perks that you want, you have to grind to get the money to buy the characters who have those perks, then you have to grind and level up those characters for those perks to be used by other characters. Also keep in mind, licensed characters must be bought with real money, so perks like Barbecue and Chili, a very useful perk that Leatherface has that allows you to see other survivors after you hook one, is essentially locked behind a paywall. Now I realize that may sound like a pay-to-win system, but none of the perks can guarantee a win no matter how good it is. You can have some of the best perks and still get absolutely destroyed no matter who you're playing as. Though that does mean that people who simply put more money into the game have access to way more resources than you do. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the many balancing issues this game tends to go through. This game has seen a multitude of changes since its inception, changes that have fundamentally made the game better. But throughout the many changes, there has been no short of bugs and balancing issues. Now, I personally have had little to no issues with these bugs and balancing issues, hence why you're not seeing any gameplay of it, but I know a lot of people have. There have been hitbox issues, perks being too powerful, perks being too weak, or straight up not working, killers' abilities being too weak, overpowered, or again, just not working properly, maps coming out broken. You might see people refer to the Twins update as the greatest example of these issues, as that was probably when it was at its peak. However, to Behavior Interactive's credit, they have made the effort to fix many of these issues, and the game is in a pretty stable and enjoyable state right now. But unfortunately, with every bug they fix, there seems to be 2 more to replace it. I also want to quickly mention the story and lore of Dead by Daylight. If you're the type of person who likes to dive deep into the lore and world of a game, then you'll be happy to know that you'll find plenty of that here. While I'm not going to get into the whole story here, the game basically revolves around these trials made by a mysterious and powerful being only known as the Entity. The Entity finds enjoyment in seeing people suffer, so it grabs people from different times and worlds to take part in its twisted games, which are the in-game matches. Each survivor and killer have their own backstory and reason for being trapped in the Entity's games. Some are there willingly, most not so much. Something I find kind of interesting about the lore is that some of the story is told through the descriptions of the perks, add-ons, and even cosmetics. You might think that their descriptions are just flavor text, but they actually can tell you how the different characters act and how the entity interacts/plays with them, especially the killers. Dead by Daylight is honestly a horror fan's dream. It pays massive respect to the slasher genre in particular. If you couldn't tell from the impressive and continually growing list of licensed characters, many of its original characters take heavy inspiration from well-known horror series. If you have ever wanted to experience what it's like to ruthlessly hunt down and butcher a band of foolish horror victims, or perhaps know the tense fear of running and hiding from a sadistic killer, then this is the game for you. Even if you're not a horror junkie, I have no doubt that you'll find enjoyment in this game. I hope I was able to pique your interest in this game and perhaps make you want to check it out yourself. I'll see you next time.